All right, so we are back here with Meg Scanlon. We're actually going to go over today, I want to go over this concept about making sure that if you're a competitive strength athlete, that you are actually focused on the day of the competition and not feeding your ego in a lift 2 months out, 2 weeks out. And when it comes to that, a lot of times lifters might not be able to trust their training process, trust what their coach has written out, and they feel like they need to hit a certain weight ahead of time, ahead of a meet. So I want to actually go over with Meg if she's had any experience with that personally, if any of her athletes have experienced that, how she has handled that personally, how she's handled that with athletes when that's happened, and we'll kind of go over some other things as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a very common problem for people to go a little bit too hard, too soon. And I think a lot of it has to do with fear of if they can't do it today, they won't be able to do it on meet day.
Yeah.
But if you do follow your program and you do stick properly to progressions, you'll find much more success over time and being able to load more as you get closer to the meet and on meet day, which is definitely the goal. I understand the reason behind ego lifting. I personally have done it. In the past, I have gone over RPs all of the time. And typically what I would find happening to myself is running into, I called it the brick wall, right? The brick wall of fatigue that I would try to push through and end up with an injury, whether it be minor or major, which then holds you back when you want to compete. In terms of coaching, it makes it very hard to find a predictability within the program to line someone up to have their best day when they are competing, which is the goal as a coach and an athlete.
Yeah. So, as a coach, is there a trick? Not a trick. That sounds like we're actually literally trying to trick somebody. But is there a technique that you've used to help build that trust with your clients to say, "I got you. Trust me. This plan laid out, if done this way." Nothing's guaranteed in this world, obviously, right. But I know based on all this experience I have that if you do these things, we're going to set you up for the best success, to have the most success on the day of the competition. Is there something that you found particularly in terms of like maybe wording you've used or analogy you've used for people or anything like that that's worked for you?
Yeah, I have found obviously it depends how much time you have working with someone before they compete, but even just saying, let me run a few blocks and we'll almost test. So they can test the waters with that type of programming and plan before they actually compete when it matters the most, so that they have more faith in it, more trust in the programming and in the plan, then they're more confident going forward. Lifting a little bit lighter, right? Yeah. Leading into the meet and progressing slowly over time. And possibly even, like you're saying, going for PRs on the day, because that is the goal.
Now, on the flip side of that, we'll see some people that if they're prepping for a meet or a competition, they may be, for lack of a better term, kind of slacking a little bit, right? We talked about this before, this concept of kind of wanting to do the fun stuff, the big main lifts, but not necessarily doing some of the other accessory lifts and things like that. As a coach, as a lifter, have you found anything in particular in that realm that you see people fall short in regards to that?
Yeah, I think sometimes people do fall short on squat, bench, and deadlift and not pushing them enough. I think that happens sometimes when people are new or uncertain under the barbell, and it might just be a time and a confidence thing. But I do think where some people fall short, whether they want to admit it or not, is in completing all of their work. And by that I mean their accessories and making sure they're completing their training days week to week, week over week, with enough effort as well.
Sure. Now, there should always be a balance with a lot of this training. So one thing that, in terms of balance, what I mean between the concept of working on technique and working on intensity. Do you have I know it's not necessarily a formula, but and I know every lifter is a little different, but when you're working with an athlete or with yourself, for example, when you're working with your coach, is there a blend in terms of when during the block, when during the phase, it's a little more of a technique phase versus intensity? Is there ever a time where normally, obviously, intensity will ramp up the closer you get to a meet. Have you ever had a meet where you and your coach, say for example, you've actually backed the intensity off and just really drilled technique a little more, knowing that, like, again, multiple time IPF world champion, you say, I know I've got the strength in there, something's wrong with the technique, I have to kind of drill this technique for this month leading up to this. Has that ever happened to you?
I've definitely done it. Leading directly up to a meet, probably not. I've given myself more space. Do you know what I mean? But I've absolutely backed off like squat and deadlift before and rebuilt my technique entirely just due to injuries and wanting to get more efficient so I could lift more load. So it is definitely something that I've done and definitely something I've recommended to others at certain points in time.
Okay, and that you said is a little more injury based. Has it ever been performance based, where you're coming out of a meet and you said, yeah, I did okay, but I know I can do so much better. And because of that, we've kind of got to strip some stuff back and actually drill that technique for a lot longer than maybe anticipated or wanted initially?
Yes, absolutely. For my squat, it was more of an injury issue that was going on. And for deadlift, definitely efficiency and to be able to load more weight onto the bar. And that's something that I probably started working on specifically a couple years ago and changing, and I still feel like I'm doing it every day.
Sure.
So although I stripped a lot back to begin with, and now I'm lifting heavier loads, it's still something I'm very aware of and that I still work on throughout my program.
Yeah, and I know that, again, there's no hard and fast numbers with all this, but in terms of coming out of a meet or coming out of a competition, do you have a certain number of weeks or even potentially months that you stay in kind of that more technique mode and that intensity is a little lower? Not that the volume is any lower, right, as we know, right? Usually the volume is through the roof during that phase, but is generally, do you have a certain amount of weeks or months that you and your coach have kind of planned post big competition like Worlds that you say, all right, for these number of weeks, we're going to really just drill home technique and volume and worry about intensity a little bit closer to the actual meet?
Yeah, so the volume definitely holds me back in general.
Sure.
And there are some days where I have variations that are constraints built in. And I feel like in powerlifting that is pretty popular just because it's so specific. We squat, bench, and we deadlift. That's all we do. So typically in programming, you're going to find, depending on how many days a week you train, some days are going to have certain constraints, whether it's to work on technique or to add a little bit more volume, that are going to restrict the intensity just because you can't load that much weight on the bar doing that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that, and I'll find that with my training as well, even though we do completely different sports, I found myself, especially post-contest, where my coach and I will strip back so much of the intensity, where I'm doing little balance drills with my feet, I'm doing other stuff where I'm working on hamstring work, I'm working on this. I'm not working with a super heavy, over 1,000 pound yoke on my back, right? Because I don't need that intensity in that moment. I actually need to work on all the little things. So like I said, working on the balance, working on my foot control. So when I do get back underneath that load, I can feel strong and stable underneath that. The answer isn't always just adding more and more and more. Sometimes it's stripping it back and looking at what's the aspects of the lift that's holding you back.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't challenge yourself during that time period, but just challenge yourself in a different way.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we really hope that these tips and kind of tricks that we have between all of our combined experience will help you. So if you have any other questions regarding this particular topic, feel free to reach out to Meg or myself. Meg, where can people reach out to you directly?
I'm usually on Instagram.
Okay. And what's that Instagram handle?
Meg Scanlift.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.